Adam Crafton, star reporter at The Athletic, one-time Sports Journalist of the Year. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
No, no, not at all, not at all. You were a very specific target that I wanted to speak to because you're quite publicly a United fan, which
Mhm.
is great in the media. So one thing that I constantly see is talk of the media agenda against United, I suppose. So I thought, given your unique perspective, you could weigh in on this. Is it a thing? What do you think of the whole phenomenon? Are United treated differently?
Um, I don't think there is a media agenda against United. I do think there is a level of interest around Manchester United that is really unparalleled, I think, across other clubs um, in the world. Um, it's certainly in the English speaking world. So, I think Real Madrid are probably a slightly bigger club in terms of, the number of fans they would get into a stadium if they were to come. I live in the United States. If they were to come to the States, I think Madrid currently are a bigger draw, and Barcelona maybe at the moment as well. Manchester United, I think, have slightly fallen off in that respect. We saw in the summer slightly lower attendances for some of the games in pre-season than maybe what we've seen in previous years. So there is this level of interest and eyeballs on United that equates to ratings and clicks, which is, that's the business that everyone is in, whether you are a broadcaster or a written journalist or a podcaster or a YouTube show or whatever. The reason why there are so many platforms about Manchester United is because of the popularity, and that is something that is often leveraged by the club to its benefit. When they go and pitch for big sponsorships, they will say, Manchester United gets so many interactions on any given day. They don't qualify those interactions, right, into being, Bruno Fernandes is the best player ever to Bruno Fernandes is a liability in midfield, right? It's just an interaction about Manchester United. So United definitely benefit from that at certain points. But I also understand why at times, because I think there is a focus on the minutiae and the ins and outs of Manchester United, which, but I can't sit here and say I've not sort of covered that. And in some ways, had a career that benefited from that because people are interested in reading about it. And there's aspects of it that I've covered, so I would be a hypocrite to say I've not. Um, that is true. Manchester United drives more traffic than I would say any. Uh, I don't see numbers of every club. I would imagine than most clubs. Maybe Arsenal's close. Liverpool can be close at times as well, of course. But in comparison to like a City or Chelsea, United are a long way clear on that.
So just focusing on the Athletic, for instance, there's kind of a handful of United reporters, whereas other clubs will have one or none. What's the general breakdown on that?
Um, I'm not gonna sort of talk about like the decisions that are made. That's way above my
Oh, no, no, no,
responsibility.
of course,
But
of
but
course.
but clearly, Manchester United have a huge amount of interest in them, and we've seen that. I think one of the things that I think the Athletic was the first to do was this focus on kind of club specific coverage.
Yeah.
So previously you would have seen what we sort of call in the trade like patch reporters. So you'd have, newspapers would have someone in the northwest, someone in the northeast, and they'd cover both clubs. I think what we've seen, and this isn't really just about the Athletic at all, it's actually about the changing news ecosystem,
Mm.
where a lot of platforms, particularly subscription platforms, have become a lot more niche in the coverage that they're trying to do. So, and you see this, like if you were to open it's obviously changed a bit since Elon Musk on Twitter, but your For You pages on Twitter or Instagram and Facebook really get into understanding the niche things that you are interested in, and they bombard you with that, right? That is kind of the way the internet's gone, and the way that I think platforms have gone. People try and get an understanding of what a reader or a viewer want, and they give you as deep and profound a coverage on that as possible. So if you have a lot of subscribers who are very interested in Manchester United, you're going to try and give them as much depth and variety of content about that club as is possible. So that's why, the Athletic will have, you know, Laurie Whitwell and Carl Anker and Mark Critchley and Andy Mitten, and other writers who have written extensively about United in the past, like Daniel Taylor, for example, as well. Who will at times weigh in. And so hopefully that gives those subscribers a level of depth and insight and expertise and takes that means there is someone for everyone. And that, there'll be the tactical aspect, there'll be the newsy aspect, there'll be a kind of a more fan-centric aspect at certain times. And then I think there is also that kind of constituency where Manchester United goes beyond the Manchester United fan. I sometimes think of this in the same way as I think United at times get covered quite similarly to the England national team, where there is this
Okay.
kind of intense scrutiny on the whole that you get around United that maybe you don't get as much with other clubs, where there is this desire for really kind of deep understanding of what exactly is going on in Manchester United. And that's part of being a global, just this huge, huge global enterprise,
Yeah.
whereby there's people in, you know, you can get into it, people know this, you get into a taxi in Thailand or a taxi in Utah,
Yeah.
and people have heard of Manchester United and are fascinated by Manchester United. And that's fascinated not only by the success of them, but also unfortunately, in the past 10 to 15 years, yeah, they are this fascinating, the amount of Americans I meet who say, like, what on earth has happened to Manchester United? Like, how is this possible? And so you're trying to explain that to people all the time and try and understand that. And I think Manchester United have, anytime I speak to executives at other clubs, not only in England, in Europe, in America, so many of them will have an opinion on Manchester United. And everyone from the outside will think, if Manchester United just do this, 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 the good days are back. And they'll all say different things, but they're all saying it, they're all thinking it. And then a few of them get to go in, as we've seen, with Ineos and a lot of the guys from Man City who have worked previously at Man City in recent years, who have now gone in there and they've found, wow, it's hard. And it's hard because of the profile of the club, because of some of the mistakes that have been made previously and currently at the club, but also the level of scrutiny, which I think creates a culture of, how do I word that? I think there's at times an anxiety within the club, a little bit of paranoia about the amount of information, that comes out of the club at certain times, um, and a little bit of, you know, frustration, because I imagine it's pretty hard to run a business competently and efficiently when there is so much focus and scrutiny of a club. And that's where you need really strong and calm people to say, well, this is how we're doing it, regardless of whatever comes out, whatever comes in from the outside. We know what we're doing. We have our plan. We're going to execute that plan. We're going to resist the noise that comes from people like me and you now as well. And we're going to do that. But that's a really hard thing to do when you've got this pressure valve constantly building.
It's a very fair point all round. It's a long point and an excellent point. There's a
Yeah,
lot of
it's not
food
very,
for thought
not
there.
very, not very, not very clippable.
Ah, I don't care about clips. It's I suppose going back to the original question, which
Yeah.
is what I constantly get, is there an agenda? I can lean on my own experience here, having spent years in the press box at Old Trafford. So it would have been probably the fourth or fifth home game of the Moyes era. Lost at home to West Brom, which was obviously unheard of.
What was that?
And I vividly recall two experienced beat journalists uh, just having a conversation in the press box, in the press lounge, about how they've been waiting for this. The quote was, "We've waited 25 years for this." Now, obviously, that was a long time ago, and that's just two individuals involved out of an enormous, swathe of the media. But I mean, is that a professional thing? Is that a personal thing? Is it literally we're so sick of writing about them winning that it's nice to cover the other side of it? I mean, obviously it wasn't you, but how would you assess that?
Yeah, I think first of all, yeah, it sounds like it was a private conversation, so it doesn't
It was
necessarily
louder than
mean
it
that
should
it
have
was.
been.
Yeah, but it's not. I don't know who those people are. It's not really for me to like defend them or whatever. I don't need to do that. The What I would say is, like when Klopp was leaving Liverpool, I remember I'd probably have had a personal conversation with people where I was like, oh God, Liverpool might not be good anymore, right? And that doesn't mean it would impact the way I write about Liverpool, or report on Liverpool. I don't think Liverpool fans would be able to find, any coverage I've ever done of them, which is, sadly, as a Manchester United fan, I think the way Liverpool have operated and run themselves over the past decade or so has been probably the way that I wish my club had been operated and run, and had better, recruitment, decision making, and a team that plays, I think, in the way that I think Man United should probably play, which is faster and dynamic and exciting, but this becoming a love letter to Liverpool. In terms of the agenda thing, I don't really think that's the case. I mean, I'm sure there are people who grew up having their lives made very miserable by Manchester United, and who have probably, privately enjoyed aspects of the past few years, because that's human nature. Like there's a lot of journalists who never reveal which team they support,
Yeah.
and my view on it has always been, and I respect that, because it's for people to make their own mind up on whether they want to do that. Personally, I just think like I think it can sound a bit weird if you're sort of there like I don't support a team, or I just like watching good football. Like, 'cause I think
Yeah.
most of us start out, watching football as a kid because of a team, and because of your dad's team or your mum's team or whatever. And you go to games and you've got a team, and that's normal. I also understand, in this era of like where anything can be used as a stick to beat where anyone who should be deemed impartial, whether that's a journalist or a referee or whatever, you're obviously leaving yourself open and out there. Like a few weeks ago, I think I saw something that an Aston Villa player had said, moaning about, the PSR rules and how that impacted them. And I think I quote tweeted it was something like, well, he's not really mentioned some of the bad signings that they've made over the past year to 18 months as well. And I didn't really think anything of it. It was like a bit of a throwaway tweet, but like the amount of sort of quote tweets and replies to that, which was sort of saying, yeah, what about, you never hear you say anything about Man United or Man United spending or recruitment or anything like that. And what's happened there is it's like clearly hit a part of the Twitter ecosystem that just never really comes across me. And because each ecosystem now is so in your own club's bubble that you may not get that crossover. So they probably just saw, oh, he's a Man United fan. He must be completely biased in favour of Man United. Whereas on the Man United ecosystem, I probably get all you do is cause trouble for Man United. So I get why it can kind of create problems for journalists. In terms of the bias, no, I genuinely don't think there is. I do think the amount of coverage and focus that Man United get. And by the way, like easy to talk here about journalists and the media, but actually, I think when you look at like the ex-players, I
Yeah.
think the weighting of that actually about United, and by the way, like it's all content that I kind of love and enjoy, right? Like I love watching, you know, Roy Keane and Paul, I saw Paul Scholes and Nicky Butt have just started a podcast. Wayne Rooney's got his own podcast. Gary Neville has a million podcasts. And on TV every week, it's basically become a staple at, 6:30 p.m. on a Sunday night in the UK after games to watch Manchester United just be deconstructed. And it's coming from a place of love, I think, from those ex-players for the club and passion for the club. But I can't imagine it's easy for players and staff at Manchester United to cope with that scrutiny and that pressure. that comes with that because it is a lot. It is a lot. Rio's got one as well now. And I don't see that ecosystem in quite the same way for, certainly not for like Man City, Liverpool. Don't re it, Probably for Liverpool, it was that way in the 90s when so
Yes,
much of
yeah.
the attention
Hansen,
was
Lawrence.
exactly, and so much of the agenda at that point would be set by what was said on Match of the Day. Now
Yeah,
we've seen this kind of huge diversification of media where it's you know, there's a lot more platforms and podcasts and stuff like that. But so much of it is about Manchester United. As I say, that's like a blessing and a curse. 'Cause it means I find it interesting. Like whenever Manchester United signed someone, United have over the years they've absolutely loved the attention that got. Ed Woodward certainly went through a period of loving the attention that he got out of some of those big moments. When Ronaldo comes back, the club was delighted to tell how many impressions that got and all that sort of stuff, but also give details on this is how our recruitment system unearthed Aaron Wan-Bissaka after 52, this data portal and all the sort of ins and outs. That's all stuff we love as journalists, any of those details. But I think what it does lead to, I don't think this is just the case with United, it means that you get this real sort of buzz of hype when a player signs. Of course you do, because it's exciting and it's different. But I think what it does then mean is there is this real come down when, within 6 weeks it's maybe not worked out. And I think, are we already seeing that with like, poor old Shesko's played what, like one, started one game, is it?
one start. Yeah.
One start, a couple of sub appearances. Obviously, the incident at Grimsby where maybe he started. He started at Grimsby, didn't he? I think.
Oh yeah, yeah. There's
Um,
one Premier League start. Sorry, two
yeah,
starts. Oh,
and he obviously had that, the incident at Grimsby where I think some people found that weird. Even if he had cramp, that he was the last penalty taker. I think a lot of people still found that a little bit strange, and that's contributed. And then you have the comparisons with Gyökeres and Isaac and everything. It's been the summer where strikers have been signed. Um, so it does mean, the scrutiny on Manchester United players in key positions. We've seen it with goalkeepers over the years, but that's been something going back to when Peter Schmeichel was being replaced.
yeah,
There is a focus on Manchester United players that I think is really hard, and I think some of the hype that the club themselves are very keen to encourage at certain times. Like Hoyland. Yeah, I'm not here. I'd never sort of make out to be like wise after the event, but like I wrote a piece when United signed Hoyland, basically sort of saying like no one really has a clue what's going to happen here. This is a
yeah,
20-year-old kid who's been signed from Italy. I can't remember the exact. I've not got the numbers to hand, but it completed a very small amount of 90 minutes. He had kind of one season of data set in Serie A, and it was during this pattern where a lot of clubs were spending very, very big on 19, 20, 21 year olds. And, Chelsea did it with Mudryk. There's other clubs that did it around the time. And, you know, to me, it seemed like laced with risk. And it seemed laced with risk because he was like the only striker at Man United. And how
yeah,
on earth are you meant to cope with that burden across four competitions and the amount of pressure you're going to be under? I thought was always going to be really tough for him. And I never really thought what's happened over the last 18 months is his fault, to be honest. Like to me, he looked like exactly what he was, which was like a young raw striker who might get 10 to 12 goals a season for the first couple of years, but needs to share the number of games.
yeah,
But by the second half of last season, it was like he's the problem, he needs to go. And they need to get a new version of him in Shesko. Okay, so let's see how Shesko goes. But I think the early impression of Shesko is this is a pretty hard system to be a striker in the same way as it was for Hoyland. It was a pretty hard system to be a striker in. And as a fan, I hope nothing more that Shesko goes on and be all those things. But I was looking at that more like, well, maybe you have both of them, and one plays one game, and another plays the other game, and they're two young strikers who can grow together. But clearly, there was financial needs about
yeah,
balancing it. So that that all just sort of comes back to this point of, I think, the impact on player performance that comes from the amount of scrutiny, that comes from the club across the whole ecosystem, whether that's traditional media, new media, podcasts, YouTube, X players, and a lot of it comes from a place of love. But the reality of like coming from a place of love is when your feelings are hurt, that probably comes across as something else, to the players. And the players do notice it. The players do, how often do you hear footballers say, "Oh, I pay no attention to what's said or what's written?" It's just not true. And
Yeah.
I remember interviewing Juan Mata years ago when he just joined United, and he would say like he just couldn't believe the amount of attention that performances at United got. And it's just something that players have to live with because it's not going to change. It's only getting bigger and bigger and bigger. People like you
I
starting
know.
these channels up, right? Causing issues.
Anyone. Adam, that's brilliant. Thank you so much. That's I don't think it's ever going to settle the debate, but it's really valuable to get that kind of insight. So thank you very much for your time.
Pleasure. Thank you.